Hi, all. Welcome to this special episode of GradMissions Office Hours. I'm Autumn Lockett, and I'm joined today, of course, with Logan, who's our med admissions partner. And our special guest today is Mallory Downs. And I'm going to let Mallory introduce herself.
Hi, my name is Mallory. I'm from Northern New Jersey. I recently graduated college last May, so I'm in kind of a gap year right now. And I went through the whole med school admission cycle twice. I am a reapplicant. I went through on my own, tried to go straight through, straight out of college, even applying during my senior year of college, and didn't have much luck. And I actually reached out to GradMissions this past cycle, and have had them helping me for this past cycle, which I'll discuss later is been a lot more successful for me. But I some things about me. I graduated from Lafayette College, and some of the things I'm interested in. I really love being active and exercising. I've played soccer my whole life. One of the biggest parts of my application, that's also a big part of me, is that I'm a volunteer EMT, and I have been for the past 5 years. So those are just some things quickly about me.
Yeah, I think that was something that really stood out to me when you reached out and we did our first 20-minute strategy call, is there weren't any red flags, right? When I read through your application, your MCAT was beautiful, and I can let you get into the specifics on that later. Your GPA was beautiful, your BCPM was beautiful, you applied early, you clearly had a ton of patient experience. Like you checked every single box. There was absolutely no reason that you shouldn't have been in a white coat, and yet here we were. And it was a puzzle. I felt like sort of an application pathologist there for a little bit, like trying to work and figure out what needed to happen. So yeah, let's dig in and talk a little bit about you're in your senior year. You know you want to go to med school. How did you get to that point? How did you know medicine was for you?
So one of my earliest experiences with medicine was actually in high school. I wasn't one of those people who grew up their whole life knowing they wanted to be a doctor. I don't have any doctors in my family. So it wasn't until high school that I had kind of my first experiences that really made an impact on me. My grandma, when I was in high school, was diagnosed with dementia. And so for me, that experience, I had seen the doctors helping my family, not just with diagnosing her and what medication she was going to take, but they were really playing that supportive role. And I saw them from kind of a different point of view that I was used to seeing doctors through. I also used to play soccer growing up. And I actually broke my ankle during a soccer tournament, which was not very fun. And again, now being even the patient, I was remember being really scared. I was in a lot of pain. And I remember the doctor, before even doing my x-ray or looking at my x-ray, calmed me down and was talking to me and trying to distract me about what position I played. And that empathy really shined through for me. So
Mm-hmm.
both of those experiences had already set me off on a good foot in high school, seeing, these people that I've looked up to that have shown me a lot of empathy in their jobs were doctors. So I decided on my own to kind of explore that field. I had volunteered at a NICU in my area, but it wasn't really hands-on enough for me. So I found out that a girl I went to high school with was a volunteer EMT. So I reached out to her, I took the classes, and I became a volunteer EMT. And it was probably the best experience I've ever had to date. It feels like one of the most impactful things I've done. I've gotten to help people. I don't get paid for it. So I don't feel like there's anything other than just wanting to help people.
Yeah.
And I learned so much. I've had hundreds of calls to date. I just hit my 5-year mark, which was really exciting. And I've worked and tried to be that person that I saw in my past experiences. I was trying to treat people, but I was also trying to distract them if they were stressed, talk to their family members and calm the family members down. So it really showed me different aspects of medicine that you don't always get to see if you're just shadowing. You get to
Mm-hmm.
see the aspects that aren't just the patient care, but all of the other things that go into it. And so then I went to Lafayette and I majored in neuroscience, and I did a lot of things that were interesting to me. I tutored a lot. I played soccer. I did all of those things. And in my pre-med classes, I was really enjoying what I was learning and always looking for that application into medicine. And through what I did at Lafayette, through EMT, which I continued on breaks, all of it just really showed me that I wanted to be there in those vulnerable moments for people, and I really wanted to help. And that has continued through with everything else that I've done. And medicine just for me seemed like that way to help people in those moments when they might be scared, when not everyone is able to help calm someone down. That is something that I wanted to be.
It seems like there's a real connection and through line, like you talked about, in terms of that empathy component and that like emotional connection component. I mean, even being a tutor, right? Like that's some vulnerability right there. I know in college for students to show up to a tutoring session and list out the things that they don't understand and be willing, the only way you get something out of tutoring is to continue to express, okay, I still don't get it one more time, right? You know, the
Yeah.
easy thing to do is to be like, oh, great, thank you. I understand now. And then leave your tutoring session and you still don't understand it better. So being able to coax out that trust from the outset of your relationship as a tutor with it as an EMT, I mean, I can imagine that that's not someone's best moment,
Yeah.
right? Encountering, an EMT or a volunteer EMT. So it seems like that's the nugget throughout that either you were seeking or it found you.
Yeah. I
Mm.
mean, I think something that I go through life doing is no matter what you have to get done, what the goal or the accomplishment is, you don't go in and you don't just say, okay, we're going to teach you chemistry. Okay, we're going to bring you to the hospital. You want to interact with people. You really want to make them feel comfortable because no one wants, as an EMT, a trip to the hospital where they say, okay, blood pressure's fine, load you in, bring you there. You know what I mean? Like people are scared. And so even in my friendships, my other relationships in my life, it was always kind of something I did initially first, where I was like, let's make that human connection. Let's ask how your day's going. Oh, you're wearing a shirt that has a sports team on it. Like, let's talk about sports, things like that. Even if I don't know that much about them, I felt like that human connection has always been a part of my life in all aspects. And medicine was a place where it really felt like it made a difference. It's obviously important in all aspects, all jobs, professions. I see it with my parents, with my friends, but in a moment that's vulnerable, as some people are going through, especially I saw as an EMT, that connection, just something that's come so naturally to me, seemed so important in that environment.
Have you always been also naturally drawn to science? Is that a field that interests you? Because there are a lot of ways to make that type of connection with people without going to medical school and without pursuing even a healthcare path.
Yeah.
Is science underlying in there?
Yeah, so I didn't really have any interest in science, I would say, until my freshman year biology class. I have a very, very good memory. It has served me really well in my academics. And so when I took freshman year biology, it was a lot of memorization of how much ATP comes out of the Krebs cycle and something about that I really liked. And then I also used science. My grandma, who the one I mentioned who had dementia, she was a
Oh,
science.
I was so hoping you were going to tell this story.
Yes, she was a science teacher. So I
It's
would
in her DNA, Logan.
exactly. It comes. I would come home, and my grandparents visited every Sunday when I was growing up. I would come home and she would come visit on the weekends and I would tell her all the things I was learning in biology, AP bio, all the things. And it was a really great connection point. So that definitely strengthened for me that interest in science and connected it with that great memory. And then when I got to college, for some reason it just kept clicking. Like I was one of those people. I took organic chemistry and yes, I had to study hard. I had a work ethic, but I did really well without having to struggle as much as I had seen some other people. So I think I was naturally good at it, which serves it well. And I liked the aspect of the memorization combined with the critical thinking. And then it was a great connection that I had with my grandma. So I think all of those things kind of led me to science.
That sounded like that was an intentional setup for you to tell that story. That really was just my genuine curiosity
Yeah,
about your path to medicine. But
yeah,
hooray for us that there was a beautiful story that went with it.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that really segues nicely into what our work looked like together, Mallory, because she's being very humble. Like she has a beautiful MCAT. She has a beautiful GPA, beautiful BCPM, and helping you find the way to tell that story, I think is really like if I had to boil down what the difference was between cycle 1 and cycle 2, it was just the way you presented and told your story. What do you think?
yeah. So I agree with that definitely. I think I never had a problem with test taking or GPA or anything like that. I think for me, science was my strong suit, and writing was where things left by the wayside. I wasn't always able to articulate exactly what I meant. So I think working with Autumn, even if I was like, here's what I want to say, how do we word that in a way that is better, was so helpful for me because my first cycle, I would write everything myself. My parents would proofread it to make sure that there weren't any grammatical errors, and I would send it. I didn't really have anyone saying, that's great, but you're being a little literal. That was a problem for me. I was always saying just exactly what I meant, or I wasn't really thinking enough about even what examples I could pull that would convey a point as well. Another thing that I think really isn't necessarily discussed about the difference between my first and my second cycle is just solely time. For me, it was honestly a blessing in disguise that I didn't get through the first time, because this year has been so great for so many reasons. I think just living where you're not going to school and you're having a full-time job is something you need to get under your skin, because you're learning so many skills. Yes, you learn time management and working with people and all of these things in undergrad, but working like in a workplace, it is so different. Some of the nuanced interactions I've had with coworkers and the things that they have taught me, I never would have been prepared for had I not had the year I have now. And it also allows me to just take that time to relax and enjoy myself. I was on a panel the other day at my college talking about med school, and they asked what I'm prioritizing right now that I've gotten accepted and that there's not many steps left. And I said, just enjoying myself and visiting friends who don't live nearby and spending time with my family. And I think going straight through, I would have missed that. And I'm 23 and I want to be able to relax and enjoy myself a little bit. So this gap year, while it's taught me a lot of things in terms of time management and dealing with other people, it's also just a nice time to relax and make sure it's me making sure that I've taken the time to step back and I still want medicine. I'm taking this time to relax and I enjoy it. I love going to work and coming home and having nothing else to do. It's so peaceful coming home and not having, okay, I have to do A, B, C, D, which I've had to do my whole life. But it's still, medicine is still what I'm aspiring to do. It's still, I'm very excited about med school. It's not like I take the break and I'm like, oh, this seems great, I don't want to keep going. It's that time for me to reflect that this is still exactly what I want.
And you're recharging. I think that's the other part of it too. I mean, that's the advice that I, as a student services director for a med school, I would have really excited admitted med students emailing me, between admission and the start of school saying, like, what books do I need to read? How can I prepare? And I would always say, you need to lay by the pool and have a pina colada.
Yeah.
You need to kick your feet up. That's not what this time is about, right? Like, this time is restorative and gratitude and reflection as you start this next chapter of your journey. So, and I'm so excited to continue to compare first cycle and second cycle, but I kind of have a question for both of you, Autumn and Mallory. So, it sounds like, Autumn, from what you were saying, the first round, it was telling her story was the primary difference, right? Because stats are the same.
Right. You
Uh,
did not retake the MCAT. Your GPA did not change.
did you apply to mostly the same schools?
Yes. So first cycle, I only applied to MD. So
Okay.
that was definitely a difference. But the two schools I've actually been admitted to, I applied to last cycle, didn't get an interview, anything, didn't even hear from them until May when they said our cycle is closed. But yeah, I applied DO this cycle, so that was definitely a little different for me. And learning about DO was actually a really interesting thing that I really enjoyed. Um, but the school focus was mainly Northeast MD schools. So I took some off that I thought, you know what, they were reaches last time, they might still be a reach again. So any school that I didn't think I really got into, I pulled. But the list is very similar. My GPA did not change because it might have technically I might have taken still a few classes, but my GPA was high enough that an A in one or two classes is changing it maybe 0.01. And it was one semester left of classes. So my GPA wasn't really changing. I luckily did not have to take the MCAT because I took it my junior year. So it was still within the time span of being allowed. And it was a score that I was happy with. So the only difference prior to interviewing, the only difference on my actual primary application was the way that I worded my works and activities. I don't even think I changed what they were. The way I worded my diversity statement, the way I worded my personal statement, I think that was, and then when I went back with secondary, those were obviously different questions, probably similar points came across, but worded differently. Up until interviews, that was probably the only main difference.
And let's just really quick, so some people have heard you say that you added some DOs in. You're admitted to both MD and DOs this cycle. Have you decided? Are you going MD or DO?
I think I've decided MD.
Okay.
I really enjoyed, so my mom has a lot of experience going to osteopathic doctors and she loves it. It's one of the reasons I've really actually considered DO this cycle. It's not even as much about DO versus MD. It's more about the specific schools that I've been admitted
Mm.
to and seeing all they have to offer. And the MD schools that I was one of them, I already went to like a open house for students, and I was accepted to the same school has an MD and a DO, and I was accepted to both, and placing them side by side, the MD school, it fit my values and aligned with what I wanted more. The resources also tended to be a little more in the direction of what I was looking for. And some of the stories that I mentioned before in terms of why doctor were MDs. So that's kind of the model I had in my head. And I definitely had to change that when I was applying DO. And I still think it's a great thing. Some of my best friends are in DO schools right now. I actually had, based on Autumn's suggestion, a friend who I went to college with help me and write something about for my DO applications because I didn't have any experience shadowing DOs. But for me, based on the individual schools and what they offered, I think MD is where I'm going to go.
Yeah. We get a lot of pushback from clients who are like, I'm only applying MD. I will not apply DO. Do you have advice for them?
Yeah. So it's hard because if I had applied DO my first cycle and I had gotten in DO, I might have gone there because I didn't get into any MD schools. And while I still think I would be happy, I think for me, the goal was MD because I knew I could get there. And it's always a little harder based on sometimes test scores and stuff to get into MD schools. I knew I could get there and I knew it was what I wanted. And so if you really, really think that you don't want to go to DO school, whether it is because of prestige or this or that or whatever reason you choose, then I understand not applying. Because if I had applied my first cycle and I'd gotten in DO and I'd be at a DO school now, I would be happy. But now holding an MD acceptance means just that much more to me.
Sure.
So I honestly recommend if you don't think you're going to go to the school, don't even apply. If you wouldn't go there, don't just throw out the application. I have a friend recently who actually was just talking to me about how UGA might be opening a medical school. And she was like, I might just throw an application in. And I'm like, well, let's talk about that. They would be trying things out on their first class. You don't know about their match rates. Like, would you actually even want to go there? And she was like,
Mhm.
probably not. I'm like, so why even send in the application? If you're not going to be happy there, if it's not a place you want to go after doing all your research, you're what's the point? You're going to get accepted and you're not going to be happy. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? So MD or
Yeah.
DO, not even regarding which type of school it is. I definitely applied to schools first cycle and maybe even a couple second cycle that I probably wouldn't have gone to or
Mhm.
wanted to go to if I had been accepted. So I think whether it's DO or MD, only applying to schools that you really think fit you and where you want to go. Because also when you get to the interview, if you're interviewing for a school and you don't really want to go there when you're talking about it, it's going to be you can fake that you want to go there and you can fake why you want to go there, but it's going to come off to some degree that you don't have all of these things about why you want to go. You don't seem excited about it. So I think that would be my advice.
Great advice.
It seems like that the other thing you're risking is what if that's the only school that you get into and now you have an even more difficult decision to make, which is I don't want to go to this school, but it's the opportunity I have in front of me. Am I going to pass this opportunity knowing I have one and go through this whole thing again? That just seems like a difficult decision to make that maybe is not worth tempting yourself with,
Yeah.
perhaps.
I also think I agree with that. And I think it also depends on cycle because if I had applied first cycle MD, NDO, and only gotten NDO, it's only your first one. So, where some people are like, I don't want to have to go through the whole application process again. Some people go through it 3, 4 times. You know what I mean? So, the first time you go through, if you're like, oh, I only got an ADO, it's hard because you're like, well, I could grow my resume, I could apply again. Whereas me now, the reason second cycle I applied is because I didn't want to go through this whole process again. I saw how much work it took. If I only got in DO, I would have been happy with that, because after going through the cycle twice, it was a lot for me. And while granted, I probably would have gone through it a third time if I had to, because this is what I want to do. I was definitely more open to different possibilities second time around. So I think first time around, it makes sense that I only applied MD, whereas now it makes sense that I was opening my options to DO.
I don't want to dive too far down this rabbit hole, but I'm just so curious that I have to ask. You said you're most likely looking at an MD program because it had programs that you were interested in, or had more of what you are interested in terms of what it offered. What are some of those things that you have found at either MD or DO? It can be just across the board that either drew you to or pushed you away.
Yeah. So I think something that you can't get away from is residency match rates, and I think MD schools tend to have better residency match rates, and there's also certain specialties that are just they're really not taking DOs compared to MDs. And I personally don't know exactly what I want to do right now, but I don't want to limit any of my options. And I actually just watched your guys' podcast about preparing yourself for residency while you're in medical school. And all of those things that you guys were talking about in preparing yourself, it's it's what the MD schools are preparing you for so well. It's yes, both DO and MD schools have interest clubs and things like that, but some of the schools I was looking at and for MD had more distinct programs to get you into shadowing or get you into research instead of reaching out randomly to a professor or a doctor and saying, "Hey, what research are you doing? Do you have any open spots?" Or, "Hey, can I shadow you?" Some of the schools I was looking at have distinct ways of getting students involved in that. They have more opportunities for students within that, um, in terms of away rotations and things like that. It just seems like MD and DO had a lot of similar programs in place, but the MD programs were more developed or had more spots or opportunities or resources for those programs. Whether that's because it was MDDO or because of the specific school, I don't know. But within their programs, the way they were trying to prepare people, they had more variety, I would say, and less limitations. Um, the DO schools had a lot of great programs. Some of the DO schools had different courses even than MD schools that I thought would be incredibly helpful at MD programs. So there were pros and cons to each. But I think the MD schools felt less limited, especially when I have no idea exactly what specialty I want to go into, and a lot of people don't. It felt like no matter what path I went down, it felt like equal opportunity, whereas DO schools, some paths felt a little more restricted.
That makes sense. Okay, this is leading us down kind of the path of what it was like to work with GradMissions, but I guess I want to hear from your perspective. We've talked about how telling your story was different. It sounds like the narrative piece of this was a major difference. If we want to get scientific about it, from your point of view, what was the difference between, first draft of a personal statement to second version of a personal statement?
Yeah, I would say my first personal statement, I think I was trying to hit too many points, and I thought that I had gone deep enough into things that I was able to move on. So I mentioned stories. There were some stories that carried over between first and second personal statement. One really big story I had about an EMT call, where there was a man having CPR, and my whole job as like a 17-year-old EMT, I was pretty fresh, was to go talk to the wife and get patient information while she knows her husband is having CPR in the other room. So I talk about this whole story of navigating that. And in my first personal statement, I touch on it, I talk about it, but I clearly don't go in depth enough to it about what I was thinking while this was happening. I talked kind of about what happened and why I thought this was like a good thing that I did. But when I was going through it with Autumn, she was like, you should probably elaborate more on this, touch on this, and talk about what you were thinking, what you're feeling, kind of your thought process, and drag this story out more. And we can cut, some of this other fluff. Some you don't need to talk about everything you've done. Let's focus on some of the more impactful experiences you've had and why they led you to being prepared for med school. That was something we also even talked about with interviews, is tying everything back to how this makes you prepared and how
Mhm.
you are someone that they're looking at as an applicant and they think she's gone through experiences that we think makes her ready to be here and we think she would succeed here. And so I think taking those stories, I think having a story is an incredibly important aspect. You don't need to have one, but I think having a story where you're interacting with a patient, if you have the patient care and you have the story, is so helpful. But really drawing it out and going deep into it instead of just kind of saying what the story was and moving past it was something that was very different between my two personal statements.
I think one thing you and I talked about is that in some of the first versions of your personal statement and your activities and experiences, and even in your secondaries, it felt a little bit like a newscaster reporting on someone's life rather than someone autobiographically talking about what happened and that introspection and highlighting things like the personal interactions, not just between you and patients, but you and your coworkers. Like I can remember us workshopping something in your interview because we did lots of mock interviews together, where you were carrying the gurney and it dropped, right? And you
Yes.
like talking about that, and you're like, oh, it's really embarrassing to talk about. But like every physician has had a moment like that where they, did the proverbial gurney drop. And, it was uncomfortable at first, but I think you got really comfortable talking about it.
Yeah. Yeah, I think to some degree, the reapplication as a whole made me much more open to talking about my mistakes.
Mm.
I was kind of a person, I mean, based on some of my test scores that was trying to be as perfect as possible. And even in my something that was so important in my interviews this cycle is they picked apart the fact that I was a reapplicant. It was a major part of all of my interviews. And they were saying, what did you do differently? I even mentioned that I tried to get some feedback. They're like, what feedback did you get? Why did you get it? They were very insistent on talking about me being a reapplicant. And with that, I had to say, this is what people told me I did wrong last cycle. Like I had to very much throw out there, like, I did something that didn't get me accepted. I'm a reapp. So it was like a very big part of my narrative to be a reapplicant. And with that, I had to talk about failure a lot.
Mm.
And when I got interview questions in my first cycle, like talking about a time I failed, I definitely had one, but it was to some degree, even though I tried to say, oh no, it's not. It was one of those failures where it's like a failure, but not a real failure. You know what I mean? People trying to show that they failed as least as possible because I was trying to come out as perfect. So I think even with that, with this new cycle, talking about failure a lot more was something that I got comfortable with and accustomed to. And I think it led me well.
Oh man, I just ate everything you said up. I mean, that is like delicious for going into medical school because so much of medical school is going to be feedback, formative and summative, right? I mean, that's literally when you're in your third year on your clerkships, you will get a feedback sheet where the summative comment is actually what goes on your dean's letter. And so
Mhm.
that's all the, delight to have in class, right? That's
Yeah.
that's everything that you want said about you. But then you also have formative comments. Those don't go in your dean's letter. That's just for you and for your improvement. But it's telling you places that you could improve in your patient care or, your preparation for rounds or whatever that might be. Early on, when you're doing OSCEs and you're in Clin Med, if anyone's listening to this, and Mallory, you included, like if you're not following any accounts that do parodies of what it's like to be a first or second year med student doing an OSCE, they're delightful. The things that people say to, standardized patients who are essentially actors, where, they'll disclose something very personal and then the student goes, uh-huh. Do you have stairs in your home? I mean, just they're hysterical, right? And I mean, that's what's,
Deadpan.
because they're just trying to check all the boxes, right? Like,
Yeah.
I'm just trying to ask what I'm supposed to ask. But that's part of this process. I mean, hilarious and funny, but hilarious and funny because everybody does it, and being able to not take yourself so seriously, number one, and know that like the growth and overcoming failure and, however you want to describe that, that is that's not just a part of the process. That is integral to the process and who you're going to become over the next 4 years. So the fact that you are already exercising that muscle, I mean, that's the stuff right there. That was awesome.
It's that reflective piece, right? Like, especially when we see an applicant like you who has such stunning statistics all around, we know you're smart. We know that. We're looking for someone who's also teachable, and I think that's something that you did a really good job reflecting on, not just in your application, but also in your interview. I want to talk a little bit about the interview experience because okay, I'm counting up. Did you end up getting seven white coat offers this cycle, or you withdrew one after the interview because you knew you weren't going to go there? Is that right?
I
Seven?
had at least 7 or 8 interviews,
Okay.
I would say.
Okay. And from that, you were offered admission at all of them, except for one you withdrew.
So some I haven't heard back from still.
Okay. You're still
Um,
waiting on some of those. Okay.
so
Perfect.
the 4 that I got accepted to, 2 DO, 2 MD, I got interviews from that. 2 I haven't heard back from.
Okay.
1 I got rejected from, and then the other one I got offered the interview, but I chose not to go along with it because
Okay.
it wasn't a school I was going to pick. Yeah.
Okay, so that was this cycle. Last cycle, you did interview some.
Yes. So last cycle I had 3 interviews, um, 2 of which were at the same schools that I've had interviews with this cycle. 1 is a different school, but the interview process as a whole has been so incredibly different. The
Mhm.
last cycle, the first interview I got was in October. Thought it went well. Um, and God bless the interviewer I had. He did not know how to work technology. The interview had cut off quickly because Zoom like cut out. And it was almost like it was just like not a great. I thought I presented myself well, but the interview experience as a whole had some glitches. And as my first interview, it was stressful. That school told me I would hear back, and then I didn't hear back a single word probably until March.
Mm,
And the second interview I had didn't come until February.
mm,
So I had like first half of the cycle, really nothing going on. This cycle, I was offered my first interview, offered in July. I had also this cycle, I did not submit my application the first day I could, as I did last cycle. This cycle, because I was also waiting to hear back from waitlist, so I was like
sure.
kind of in this mumbo jumbo area, and I was also a little mad, to be honest. So I was like, I'm gonna take my time with it. I'm gonna do what I want. I'll submit it when I submit it. And I submitted it probably like 2 weeks after. So it wasn't like a long time, but it was like the
Sure.
last time I submitted it, like right when I could. And I heard in July, like, we want to interview you in September, which again was very different because the interviews I had last cycle was like, we want to interview you in 4 days. So I was like,
Mm,
oh my gosh, I need to prep in 4 days. How am I going to do this? I don't even know what they're going to ask me. Whereas this one, I think we had time to mock interview 2 or 3 times between July and September.
yeah.
And that school did offer me admission on October 15th. So this cycle was like first day of acceptances. I knew what was going on. It was very different. Um, and again, another school I interviewed with offered it and then stuck to their timeline. So I had all 4 acceptances before 2025 had ended. And
Mm,
so it was a very nice difference that I was getting interviews early on in the process. I was hearing back early on in the process. So that was definitely like a different just timeline thing. That was a lot less stressful for me interview wise.
yeah. I love that. You said I was a tough interviewer.
I think you were tough but good. I don't know what I was expecting. The only mock interview I had done like job interviews for other jobs, but my college offered mock interviews.
Mhm.
And so I did one virtually and it was very nice. The guy told me I did perfect and he had no feedback for me, which is like lovely. Thank you so much. But there's no way that I didn't do anything wrong. You know what I mean? So that was before I even had worked with you and like perfected my Y medicine. So there was definitely problems. But with you, it was you knew the way that things worked format wise, which was incredibly helpful because we did MMI prep, we did regular
Mhm.
prep, we did MD prep. Whereas in my last cycle, I luckily didn't have any MMIs, but if I had, I would have been like, I'm not used to this format. I'm learning it. They often have info sessions to explain to you how it goes on, but not like that. With you, it was nice because you had known the format. So even if I wasn't completely prepared, you were. And the questions that you asked were that you had given me to prepare were so perfect because I had not by preparing questions, you prepared questions that I had practiced based on competency. And while I hadn't done that for any of my interviews in the past, I realized that those questions were so widely applicable that as long as I had some kind of answer for each competency, it was like picking and choosing. And when time came, there was not a question that I got interview wise, maybe one where it was like, tell me about a time you, and I drew a blank. That is like the most stressful thing to me is tell me about a time you, because if I can't think of a story offhand, you're sitting there going, and you're like, but by preparing by competency, that's exactly what these schools are hitting. And so even if the question didn't exactly align, they aligned well enough that I was pretty on the money. And the critiques you gave me afterwards, while some of them might have been a little tough, it was exactly what I had going through my head while I was interviewing and making sure, okay, I'm not tying things back enough to how I'll succeed in med school based on this, or this question. I remember you said I talked too long because I love to talk, so I would drag it out. So I was trying to be more concise with my answers. So I think the preparation that we did was I was so great for my interviews. And then it was great because it's not like I necessarily had to completely prep before each one. Having some of them closer together, I was like, I just did one last week. I feel confident that I'm going to remember what I said and I can drag it over to this one. So it wasn't like a big moment of stress.
I thought that the hardest thing for me in the interviews is by that point, we have gotten to know each other really well, right? Like we have been working asynchronously and in live writers workshops and like we're kind of buddies, but like I don't know if you think we're buddies, but I think we're buddies by
Yes.
that point. And so then we get into interview day and we've gotten pretty chummy and my kid has run in once and given me a smooch while we're while we're meeting. And then
Mhm.
I'm trying to give you a mock interview where you feel nervous and where you feel, and so it's like changing that role of, okay, I'm not gonna, especially in those first couple, I'm super tough because I have sat in the background of med school, real med school interviews when a person asks a question, the doctor asks a question, the applicant responds, they give them no feedback. They don't even look up from their notes, and they've already asked the second question. And it's jarring. It can be really jarring. And so, in those first couple of mock interviews, I'm not going to give you feedback. I'm not going to like nod and smile and give you that like the mom in the front row of the piano recital response, right? Like I
Mhm.
want you to feel anxious and nervous and know how to stop. That's hard. It's hard to know when to stop when someone's not giving you that physical feedback,
Mhm.
especially in this space where all of your interviews virtual.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, it was very perfect because for me, especially throughout my first cycle, if I was talking to an interviewer and we didn't get to that chummy point, I almost felt like it was a failure. I felt like if you're not asking them about their experience at the end and going, "Oh, me too," and then you're like, "Cause I'm from this area," trying to have that sort of connection with an interviewer and have that conversation that's not strictly medical. I felt like I had almost like I didn't think the interview would went well in my head if I hadn't gotten to that point. So practicing that with you was like, okay, readjust my expectations. And then the first interview I had, which was the first acceptance I had an interviewer who did exactly what you said. He was pretty stoic. He would ask the question, he would say, okay. He would ask follow up questions, but it was very monotone. He wasn't really giving me much. And it was actually nice. I had two interviewers and one was giving me something. So it wasn't completely
Sure.
stoicism, but it was definitely like he was not going to have that chummy, oh, well, I'm from this area. This is what I do on blah, 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 blah connection moment that I've been hoping for. And by our mock interviews and knowing that that's not necessarily make or break was so helpful because in my first cycle, you do three interviews, you don't get into anyone. You're like, am I a bad interviewer? And you're going back and you're analyzing, we even
Of
discussed
course.
what went wrong with my cycle. We were like, maybe I'm a bad interviewer. And I literally went back and like analyzed so much what I had said, what it had felt like. And when we started working together, we kind of put that out the window and it was like, okay, it doesn't matter how they respond to you. You can't overanalyze in
No.
an interview and figure out what went wrong. You gotta be prepared for the next one. You have to just present yourself the best you can and kind of ignore the way that they're choosing to react in response.
That's right. And that's why those Likert scale score responses are so people are like, why are you using a Likert scale? I'm like, number one, because that's what med schools use. And number two, because it shows you where you are and where you're going and like how you get there, right? It actually maps it out. It's a rubric. And I just think that clear transparency buffeted by the competencies is really the best ticket. A med student loves a formula. Please, it's your favorite thing.
Yeah. No, I agree. I also think it was so helpful having you who knew that they score it that way. For me, just made me so much more comfortable having someone who kind of knew what was going on, because no matter how much research I do on my own, I'm never going to know what's going on in their heads or in the room
Sure.
where they're discussing me. I even was telling my mom the other day, living my parents were very invested in my med school journey, and so there can be some sort of friction in trying to manage both of your expectations and what you both think you should be doing. So having you to just, my mom had a question and I'm like, oh, I'll ask Autumn. That takes all the pressure off of me trying to figure it out on my own. And it's just like a quick and easy email. And it's like, I literally emailed you like, there's this one question on the primary. Do I click yes or no? Like that's literally sometimes some of the questions I would ask you.
Mhm.
Just they can build up if you have all of these, I don't know just what to clicks, and being able to ask someone who knew exactly what was going on was so peaceful and brought me so much at ease. And especially when we got to the interview space where I know you had seen interviewers, talked with med schools and their interviewers. Even you mentioned to me that sometimes the interviewers don't know, um like they're not trained. Like they will throw alumni in as interviewers
Oh
and they
yeah.
didn't prep them at all beforehand. They're like, just go ask these questions. For me, knowing that made me feel a lot better
Yeah.
that the responses they were giving or things like that weren't pre-calculated or anything like that. Like it's just a person I'm trying to have a conversation with and they know as little as I do. So some of
Mhm.
that background information for me, even if it wasn't directly translating into results, put my mind at ease and helped ease some of those anxieties.
Logan, your eyes were lighting up and the throwing the alumni into the interview. We literally at one of the med schools I was helping with interviews, there was a physician who got called into like a life-saving surgery. And like that wins every time. Like I don't care if he's on the admissions board, he was my lead interviewer. He's like, gotta go save a life. Okay. So then brought in one of those alumni who didn't know how to work technology. I was like remotely running his computer from my computer so that he could work the Zoom. You know what I mean? And
Mhm.
so if that poor student, that poor applicant that he was interviewing was trying to read the tea leaves on his body language, it was pure terror. You know,
Mhm.
that's what she was picking up on.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, the wild card alumni community physician, you never know. I mean, even just truly all other things being equal, just private practice or community versus academic medicine, just light years between them, in terms of technology and and also just understanding what is med school like today,
Mhm.
right? I mean,
Yes.
it's very, I mean, it's different than it was. It's different than it was 5 years ago. It's different than it was
Mhm.
pre-COVID, let
Yeah.
alone 20, 30, 40 years ago.
Yeah.
Um, as you were talking about interviews, just one thing popped into my mind. On your Zoom interviews, did you have the chance to talk to current medical students at those schools?
Yes. So depending on the school, one interview I had with a school was with a current student only. It was a one-on-one with a current student, which I honestly love because as we're mentioning, some of the alumni don't know what med school is like today. They don't know what their med school is like today. You ask them a question about the school and they're like, I can't help you.
Yeah,
Which is hard because they always say you're interviewing them as much as they're
That's
interviewing
right.
you. If I'm trying to get information from you about the school and you don't know anything about the school, that's not very helpful for me. And it doesn't make the school look appealing to me if they can't answer my questions. So some of the schools had the interviews with actual students, and then a lot of the schools they'll do like an interview day. So they'll do session like a session beforehand with like the dean and everyone introduces themselves, break, interview, and then Q&A with students. And it's and the all the faculty will log off so there's no pressure. And it's like I remember for one school, three students all sitting in one apartment next to each other and all of us just literally firing questions away at them. So most of the schools that I interviewed with had that set up where They would do like, if it was an MMI, the beginning would be, how does the MMI work? If it was not an MMI, it was like, here's a little bit of info about our school. The dean would come on, or someone from faculty would come on, interview, and then meeting with students. Unless the interview itself was with a student, in a couple cases, then they didn't have that. But I would say a lot of times, if almost every time, there were students involved in the interview process.
What was your go-to question for the school?
Ooh, that's a good question. So
We worked on this a lot.
I have questions based on different areas. So if I was talking to, this is one I really liked. If I was talking to an alum who's like a doctor, sometimes you want to ask them for their advice. It makes them feel really good. So I would start and say, based on your years of experience, what advice would you give to someone like me just starting out? Whether
In
that's through med
medicine.
school, the career,
Yeah.
anything. And that was really good because I got some very interesting advice and made them feel good sharing their advice. But a question I really liked for the students, which I asked probably every single time, which is also very important to me, is, can you think of a time where the school made a change based on student feedback?
Great question. Yes. Autumn, I feel like there are podcast episodes I should have brought that up on, because that is
Yes.
so critical.
Yes, student feedback.
Yes.
Because you're in the trenches of it, and if they're not open to feedback, especially in these post-COVID days, Logan, you led a med school through COVID, and like moving to more remote, like so many things have changed, and if we weren't listening to our students and making changes, no, I mean, listen, in the law school where I worked, they always wanted to have a beer pong table in the student union. Okay, obviously there are some things that aren't going to work,
Yeah.
but to the extent that it's manageable and that we can make it happen, even slow incremental changes makes such a difference.
Completely agree. Yeah, I have countless examples. Even outside of COVID, I mean, I'll never forget there was this like catastrophic October ice storm
Yes.
out of nowhere that in medical school there's not a snow day. Like what they say is, watch last year's recording and we'll see you tomorrow and we'll pick up exactly where we were going to pick up, right? Like nobody's pausing, you're not skipping a day, like the curriculum goes on. But there was this catastrophic ice storm, and students, faculty, everyone was without power for weeks. I mean, days, weeks, it just went on and on and on. And I remember the medical school kind of tried to just basically be like, oh, well, this is how we handle snowstorms. Like, you just have to keep going. And students were like, I don't have heat. I don't have power. I don't have Wi-Fi. I can't get out of my garage to come to the school to study. I have a family. I have a small child, and we don't have heat in my home, and really had to pump the brakes and be like, well, hold on. This isn't the usual situation. And the school, to their credit, I mean, the damage was done, to be honest, for that time period, but for every circumstance that came up after that, they paused and said, okay, now hold on. If it goes this way, we follow the policy. If it goes this way, here's our plan for the next time. So they really did learn and, implement that moving forward. I remember my contribution was that I bought them all a free Jimmy John sandwich. That was all that I had to offer. But I said, I'm so sorry for your troubles. Please come to the school and enjoy this free sandwich on me. So that was my love language. In student services, we're going to offer you free food to make up for any of our shortcomings.
That's right. You just do what you can.
Yeah.
That's it. Okay. So I have two quick questions. I know you are, Mallory, a mentor for many people who are going through med school, both because your mom said so and because that's just who you are. You hold the door open for this coming behind you. What advice do you have for someone who tuned into this podcast because they're hearing from a real, alive, accepted med student?
That's a good one. I would say one of my biggest piece of advice, which I touched on before, is taking that gap year. If that is a possibility for you, especially if you're considering, do I go straight through or do I take that gap year? That is one of my biggest pieces of advice I've been giving to everyone lately. My other piece of advice is just, I know the application process. I went through it twice. I know it can be really stressful, and I know there's a lot of tests, and because not just the MCAT, there's the ethics tests and this and that, and there's a lot of writing.
Situational judgment. What if I
Yeah.
said what if I said preview to you? Are you gonna
Oh
do you
my
remember that?
gosh.
Remember those
Oh,
days?
I had to take it twice. I remember it. I would say with everything going on, there's a lot of writing to do and stuff to just, if you need a break, give yourself that break. That goes for everything. I think being incredibly prepared is incredibly important. I found online, a lot of times online secondaries will be released or they'll reuse them for previous years. It's so helpful to pre-write. So I think you can set yourself up for success in many ways in being prepared for the cycle, but things are always going to change and you're never exactly going to be prepared. I remember I had my first cycle, I had an interview. I was offered an interview and the interview date was on my birthday. And I had all of these plans for my birthday that I had to cancel because I was like, I have to go to this interview. So you can be prepared and it's a great thing, all you want, but things are going to change. So you have to be prepared for that. Try not to stress out too much. Everyone who's applying and who has applied has gone through the same thing and they're going to make it through it. If you keep trying and you're being persistent and you go through multiple cycles like I do, I'm sure everything will work out. And I know there are people who've applied who didn't get in, maybe, and they're still happy with the path they've chosen. So I would say be calm and just let things work out the way they will and put in get you can only give your best self. You can only give who you are. So be authentic. That's another thing. Be so authentic the whole time. I even in through your application and the extracurriculars that you're doing, as of right, if you're watching this and right now you're doing an extracurricular that you hate, stop doing it. Because when it comes time
Mm.
to talk about it, why, oh, what do you like about it? Why are you doing it? You're not going to be authentic. So yes, there's certain things that you have to get done. You want to get those patient care hours. But if it's more interesting to you to be in a pottery club than to go shadow a physician every Friday night, do the pottery club and because they want real people who have real interests. And I think prioritizing things that make you happy while going through the cycle is also another way to manage stress. So being authentic throughout the whole thing.
Say all of that. That's exactly right. That's exactly it. Yep. It doesn't have to be drudgery. There's a lot of joy in this journey to med school. Logan, do you have a last question for Mallory?
One word to sum up your second application.
Hmm. I would say Autumn kind of said it before when we were talking, but I guess I would say persistence because so much of my second application was just talking about my first application,
Mm.
which is so hard. And being persistent and not letting the fact that that failure happened to you, don't let it define the fact like some people I've talked to other people who have reapplied, and sometimes the term reapplicant stresses people out a little bit, like, oh, I didn't do it the first time. And for me, I honestly think it helped me in my second cycle being a reapplicant. It was a talking point that I had thought about from all angles, and it really was actually a benefit. It was a failure that I had learned from and an easy example to pull and really investigate in all aspects. So I would say persistence in just applying again and going through all the motions of retaking things and rewriting things, but also persistence in not letting any failures from my first cycle affect the person I was showing to admissions the second time, even if it was a school I had interviewed with twice in a row.
Yeah. That's beautiful. Mallory, it was a joy to work with you. I'm with you until you're in your white coat. That's a part of our work. So it's very typical when you go to your admitted students day to send a picture in the men's cut, a picture in the women's cut, and I'm going to help you figure out which one's best for your shoulders. That's also, I mean, I don't know how to put that on my LinkedIn, but that's something that I can do. We're so thankful for you coming and just sharing this knowledge. There's so much bad information out there about what actually happens in med school applications. So thank you for your time and for your 5 years of EMT service. Oh my gosh, thank you.
Thanks. I really enjoyed being here. When they reached out to me and asked me if I would be a part of this, I was like, oh my God, yes, let me give you every day I'm available. Because I really think this is information that gets passed around, but you can't always hear it directly from the source and
Yeah.
correctly. And if I had had someone who I could just, because I didn't know that many people pre-med before me, if I had had someone I could just sit down with and tell me this is what I went through, you're not alone,
Yeah.
and it's normal to for all of these things to happen, it would have given me so much less stress. So.
Thanks so much, Mallory. You can find more information about applying to med school across all of our socials. We're at grad_missions, basically anywhere you want to find us. And keep tuning in, subscribe, and we'll have more of these stories for you. Thanks, y'all.